Okay.
All right, good morning. So glad to see each and every one of you with us. This morning we are going to something we all struggle with, and that's the tongue. And this lesson is almost entirely going to come from the book of Proverbs because the wise man Solomon spent a great deal of his Proverbs on the subject of the tongue. And so we're going to look at it from both a negative standpoint and a positive standpoint because the tongue is very, very powerful. In Proverbs chapter 18, the wise man tells us this in verse 21. He says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Death and life. That's what we're talking about this morning. See, the tongue is capable of great evil, but it's also capable of great good. And so, the Word of God teaches us that our tongue is extremely powerful. It is capable of both. We go back just a few pages to Proverbs 11. We find here the wise words beginning in verse 9, where he says, "The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices, and when the wicked perish, there's jubilation. By the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, but is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked." And so we already see that the mouth is capable of both. Great good, great wickedness. Great evil, great good. And so, first of all, let's look at the negative side. Great evil. In Proverbs 18, the wise man tells us this beginning in verse 6. Proverbs 18, verse 6 says, "A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul." See, great evil can come out of a person's mouth. Great evil. In what way? All kinds of ways. Some of the most obvious ones. Lying. The wise man says lying is not just bad, he calls it an abomination. Our society doesn't think too much about lying. It doesn't, I'm amazed at how lying is not a big deal anymore. When I was in school or something, lying was just looked down upon. But nowadays, it just doesn't seem to be a big deal at all. But Solomon says, we go back to Proverbs 12 one more time. He says this in verse 22. He says, "Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight." That's a great lesson that one of these days I'm going to look at it. The things that the Bible says God delights in. And there's a number of things that he delights in. One of these is telling the truth. Every time we tell the truth, a person tells the truth, God is delighted. But he says, when a person lies, regardless of who it is, it's an abomination. And that is a strong word coming from God. And it's something that will not go unpunished. When I think about all the lies that are told nowadays in our society, they will not go unpunished. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 9 says, "A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies shall perish." So in this life we may get by with all kinds of false witness and lying and dishonesty, but not with God. That's what he considers it, how important it is. And it sometimes and often it comes from a heart that's filled with hatred. Back in Proverbs 10, Solomon tells us this in verse 18. Proverbs 10:18. "Whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool." So see, a lot of times Lying, dishonesty, deception comes from a heart that's what? Filled with hate. And so because of that hatred, they lie about something, about someone, about something that happened. And so, in the short term, the short run, lying can sometimes bring success. But its end is going to be death. It's going to be death. In Proverbs 21, verse 6, the wise man says, "Getting treasures by a lying tongue is the fleeting fantasy of those who seek death." See, you may get a short, little, small amount of success in this life, but the end is going to be spiritual death. And sometimes, even in this life, lying will bring about physical death. So, in God's eyes, lying is a great evil. So is flattery. And here's how flattery is defined: insincere compliments which are used to win someone's favor and manipulate others. In Proverbs 26, these wise words are left for us. Proverbs 26, verse 28. "A lying tongue hates those who are crushed by it, and a flattering mouth works ruin." Works ruin. That's what it says. It brings about ruin. And just a few verses down in Proverbs 29, verse 5, he says this about flattery: "A man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet." Spreads a net for his feet. See, he's going to get entrapped. Isn't that what nets do? They trap something. And so someone who, that's what they're constantly flattering someone, it's insincere, they don't mean it. They're just trying to manipulate somebody in some way. They will bring about ruin to themselves because they're essentially trapping themselves. And of course, gossip. The Bible uses different words for someone who gossips. Sometimes they use the word talebearer. Sometimes the Bible will use the word whisperer. But that's what they all are. All right? These can do so much harm. They can betray and destroy a friendship. How often have we heard that happen? A lot. Proverbs 11, verse 13. Says, "A talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter." A lot of things, even if they're true, doesn't need to be passed on. That's what he's talking about. Can betray a friendship. In Proverbs 16 and verse 28, this is what the wise man tells us. "A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer," notice this, "a whisperer separates the best of friends." If you've ever taught high school, you've seen this happen constantly. Can separate the best of friends. Sure does. Creates strife, creates division, creates harm. In Proverbs 16, there in verse 27, "An ungodly man digs up evil and is on his lips like a burning fire." What does this person do? He's trying to find out something bad about somebody. And as soon as he does, what happens? He's got to tell it. Like a burning fire. He's going to destroy whenever he can. That's what happens. We go down. Verse 30. "He winks his eye," still talking about a talebearer. "He winks his eye to devise perverse things. He purses his lips and brings about evil." Someone who gossips, who tries to dig up something bad on someone. Always wants to hear something bad. And then what do? They have to tell it immediately. So, create strife, division. It can destroy a person's integrity. This is a very important point. In chapter 11, verse 9, It says, the hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. See, what does it do? Destroys his neighbor. That's what gossip can do. It can destroy a person. And once something is said, you can't take it back. It's just like putting something out on the internet or on Facebook. It's there forever. Never take it back. It's just there. And that's why he warns about it. You want to be very, very sure of what you're saying. That's what he says. And then in chapter 25, the wise man says this about our tongue, and still talking about gossip and talebearing and whispering. Chapter 25, verse 9. Debate your case with your neighbor, and do not disclose the secret to another, lest he who hears it expose your shame and your reputation be ruined. Debate it with your neighbor. Do not disclose the secret to another. Because what? Someone could expose your shame, and when they do, your character, your integrity is going to be ruined. What about cursing? There's something else that the tongue can do that brings about great evil. In Proverbs 20, verse 20, he tells us this: whoever curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in deep darkness. Usually that expression means death. Put out. This word here for cursing means to treat lightly, to regard as insignificant. So when you're cursing something, you're basically saying it's not worth anything. It's worthless. And like I said, it can end in damnation. See, slandering others can do the same thing. Toward the end of Proverbs, in Proverbs 30, verse 10, he says, do not malign a servant to his master, lest he curse you and you be found guilty. Notice that. You be found guilty. So, slandering people, cursing people, can bring about destruction. But what's the good side of your tongue? Well, just like it can bring great evil, it can bring great good. That's how powerful it is. In Proverbs 15, we're told this in verse 4, a wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. See, a wholesome tongue. What? It produces life. So words can bring life to people who are suffering, who are downtrodden, who, have gone through difficult times. They can do all of that. In Proverbs 10, we read this in verse 11. It says, the mouth of the righteous is a well of life, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. So the mouth of the righteous, it's a well of life. See, our tongue, what we say to people, can do an enormous amount of good if we say the right things in the right way at the right time. It has tremendous value. In Proverbs 10, verse 20, he says, the tongue of the righteous is choice silver. It's choice silver. How valuable. And it can nourish multitudes. Proverbs 10, verse 21. The lips of the righteous feed many. I love that. The lips of the righteous feed many. So we're already seeing that what we say can do an enormous amount of good. We've already seen it can do an enormous amount of evil, but it can do an enormous amount of good. So when we say the right words, pleasant words, they can make, it's like eating something healthy. It's like eating healthy foods. In Proverbs 16, verse 24, the wise man says, pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul, and health to the bones. Pleasant words. Words fitly spoken. Words that are chosen, again, at the right time, said in the right way, with the right heart, can do an amazing amount of good. These type of words, encouraging words, edifying words. You know, someone who is anxious, someone who's depressed, someone who is going through a difficult time, all of those situations, by encouraging, by edifying, by using pleasant words, those can really help someone who is going through very difficult times. And it's about timing. You know, it's not just about what you say and how you say it, it's about when you say it. You know, sometimes it's best, at least at first, not to say anything. Remember about Job's friends when they came to see him, what did they do? They didn't say a word for a week. Didn't say anything. And that was probably good because a lot of things they said didn't help. But timing, well-timed words can bring a lot of good. In chapter 15, verse 23, he says, a man has joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is. See, speaking in due season is speaking at the right time. Choose the appropriate time. A word fitly spoken. That's one of my favorite in Proverbs, chapter 25, verse 11, where he says, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Fitly spoken. Right words at the right time. Well thought out words. We need to, again, think carefully about how the words are said and what you say. In chapter 15, verse 28, we're told this. The heart of the righteous studies how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. Well, that's what they do. They just spout off anything without thinking about it. But the righteous does what? Studies how to answer. You think about, okay, what is the best way to answer? What is the best thing to say? What words are going to be best? Brings about great good. So controlling what you say brings a lot of benefits. In chapter 13, verses 2 and 3, Solomon says, a man shall eat well by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the unfaithful feeds on violence. He who guards his mouth preserves his life, but he opens wide his lips shall have destruction. Guards his mouth. Guards his mouth. All right? How important that is. It keeps one from trouble. The last thing we want is trouble. Chapter 21, verse 23, whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from trouble. And how many times have you said something and knew it was wrong immediately when you said it? That's what he's talking about here. Guarding your mouth and tongue. It's going to keep you from a lot of trouble. Soft words. In chapter 15, the first two verses, Solomon says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. Okay? A soft answer. Soft words. A lot of times that can kind of diffuse explosive situations. You know, when you're taking education classes and so forth, and you have PD days, a lot of the things is about how do you diffuse explosive situations. That's one of the things you talk about. Well, in chapter 26 of Proverbs, Solomon talks about how to diffuse explosive situations with your words. Chapter 26, beginning in verse 20. Where there's no wood, the fire goes out. And where there's no talebearer, strife ceases. As charcoal is to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. Fervent lips with a wicked heart are like earthenware covered with silver dross. He who hates disguises it with his lips, and lays up deceit within himself. When he speaks kindly, do not believe him, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. Though his hatred is covered by deceit, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. That's what we want to do. We want to be able to say the right things, put out the fire. He says, where there's no wood, the fire goes out. Okay, you take away the source of the problem goes away. That's how you diffuse it, he said. So Solomon, have you noticed, and I haven't talked about every single verse, but out of those chapters, think about how many verses Solomon talks about our mouth, our speech, our tongue. Obviously, something very important in our lives. In chapter 17, we're going to close here with a couple of verses. Chapter 17, beginning in verse 27, he says, he who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of a calm spirit. Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he's considered perceptive. Now think about that. Even a fool is considered wise when he doesn't say anything, when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he's considered perceptive. Now, the wise man Solomon teaches us the value of being careful with what we speak. So this morning, as we sing this invitation song, there may be a need for you to ask for prayers, maybe strength to say the right things at the right time. But whatever the reason, we encourage you to come as we stand and sing.